Section 3 of Reclaiming Revolution. History, Summation, and Lessons from the Work of Storm. Standing Together to Organize a Revolutionary Movement. This recording is in the public domain. Recorded by the Progressing America Project. Reclaiming Revolution. Section 3. 1994. Launching Storm and First Steps. Having come through the study group and the post-study debates and discussions, 8 people launched Standing Together to Organize a Revolutionary Movement, STORM, on November 2, 1994. They spent that rainy day protesting Proposition 187, the racist, anti-immigrant ballot initiative that California voters had approved a day earlier. STORM was an attempt to preserve and carry forward Raw's radical militant energy into a more systematic organizational form. STORM had 2 central points of unity. 1. We need solidarity among all oppressed people, working class people, people of color, women, and queer people, in the fight for total liberation from all systems of oppression, centrally including capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia, and ableism. 2. To win liberation we need change on a revolutionary scale. These politics were meant to take Raw's Third World unity and expand it to a unity of all oppressed people. STORM also began a step to Raw's left by making an explicit commitment to revolutionary change. STORM also explicitly prioritized the leadership of women of color in the revolutionary movement, something Raw had never done. As the next step in the Raw experiment, most of STORM's founders had assumed that many Raw veterans, particularly those with Marxist leanings, would come together under STORM's banner. But that didn't happen. Many had moved away or gone back to school. And disputes, primarily among the 3 committed anarchists and the 6 committed communists, had driven many of the more politically experienced and ideologically committed revolutionary Marxists out of the study process. So in the end, STORM represented a new collection of movement activists with a wide range of political experience and ideology. STORM's 8 founders were playing important roles in the movement as leaders, organizers, and institution builders. They included labor organizers, anti-police brutality organizers, and pro-choice and anti-domestic violence activists. They worked with organizations like HERE, Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees Union Local 2850, Bay Area Police Watch, later to become the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, and various direct action organizations. STORM's initial design and initial challenges. Now that they had started a revolutionary organization, these 8 people had to figure out how to run it and how to build it. They decided to design STORM as a loose cadre collective whose structure borrowed from both the anarchist and communist traditions. STORM had a closed membership. People could not just decide to join whenever they wanted to. Instead, the group invited small classes of activists to become new members. This ensured more consistency and accountability within the membership. It also allowed the group to maintain its strict demographic quota requirements. Each class was required to be at least 75% people of color and 60% women. STORM also expected more of its members than Raw had. Every member was expected to be active in at least one of the organization's work groups. They also had to follow STORM's code of conduct and security protocols, agreed to methods of work and conduct that were designed to ensure group cohesion and discipline. These features of STORM's structure were borrowed from the cadre organization model, popular in the communist political tradition. But unlike such organizations, STORM had no designated leadership. Instead, STORM borrowed from the spokes model of the anarchist tradition. The group made all decisions together by a modified consensus process. In terms of formal leadership, STORM had only a coordinating committee, CC. The CC was an administrative body with representation from each of STORM's work groups. This structure led to some early problems in STORM's relationship to other groups and activists in the movement. Some had criticism of STORM's closed structure and its poor communication about its decisions. Other people, wary of the cadre structure, thought STORM was trying to start a new party, or that STORM thought of itself as the vanguard. Some felt excluded from the founding process while others thought that it had taken too long. Some people had lofty expectations of the organization and were disappointed when not all of those expectations were met immediately. And without a clearly identified leadership structure, it was difficult for Storm to respond to these concerns and criticisms. Storm also faced larger political challenges. As noted earlier, the right was on the move, while the left was in decline. In particular, the right had seized on the statewide ballot initiative as a way to push its agenda. Bay Area radicals, having avoided electoral politics for years as an inherently reformist arena, were ill-equipped to respond to these tactics. Storm members didn't want to move into reform politics, and we were unsure how to use direct action street tactics to effectively fight back in the context of electoral fights. With this confusion, the militant direct action scene in the Bay Area, which had laid the groundwork for Storm, began drying up. Large-scale direct actions drew fewer and fewer people. And fewer young activists were moving into the Bay Area because of the skyrocketing costs of living associated with the dot-com boom. As a result, Storm did not have a large pool of new activists to work with, or clear work to relate to. Stepping out into the world. In spite of these challenges, Storm got to work. Storm's early program reflected an intention to take raw strength, mobilizing young people of color into militant direct action, and combine it with more deeply rooted organizing in our communities. The organization's early work was to be based in low-income communities of color, and also to recognize the central role of youth in movements for social change. As Storm was getting off the ground as an organization, its members remained deeply involved in their current movement work. They made important contributions and helped set an explicitly revolutionary pole in their mass work. Then, in February, just a few months after its founding, Storm brought in its first class of new members. Some of these new members had been involved in RAW, but most hadn't. 2 young women of color came from political and cultural youth work with Education for Liberation. 2 people came from anti-poverty organizing. Starting their work with Empty the Shelters, which organized student leaders to work in working-class communities around poverty issues, they moved on to build the Justice Education Action Project, a project designed to educate young people about their rights in the criminal justice system, and the General Assistance Rights Union, which organized general assistance recipients in San Francisco to fight for their rights. One woman was involved in the domestic violence movement with La Casa de las Madres. Others were involved in student organizing, direct action activism, and solidarity work with third world liberation struggles. All told, the class had 8 people, bringing Storm's membership to 15. And when these 8 joined, the veterans of RAW became a minority of Storm's membership for the first time. With this new influx of members, Storm started to become a more serious force in the Bay Area social justice movement. Members were active in many sectors of the movement, from the women's movement to the labor movement to the community organizing world to the direct action movement. 15 hard-working leaders were intentionally promoting Storm's revolutionary politics in their mass work. Other left organizations often invited Storm to speak at their events, from a radical young people of color perspective. Storm members promoted the organization's politics of solidarity and revolution, in a period where much of the left was feeling demoralized and marginal. Storm was starting to challenge both the left, which was largely isolated from mass struggles, and the broader mass movement, which was often limited to talking about specific issues instead of larger political analysis. From the beginning, Storm's impact was felt mostly through its members' individual, independent political work. This would remain true throughout the life of the organization. But early on, Storm also wanted to develop organizational work, what we called Storm work. Once the first class had joined, Storm made its first attempts at independent organizing work by building work groups around different issues. These work groups were the structures through which members engaged in on-the-ground work. These work groups were open not only to Storm members, but non-members also. The first work groups included Fillmore Standing Together, FIST. FIST worked with residents in San Francisco's Plaza East housing projects to block the demolition of the projects until the city guaranteed that all of the current tenants would have the opportunity to return once the replacement housing was completed. For Real. For Real supported the Youth Uprising Coalition, a group of young people who fought and defeated an attempt to impose a curfew on San Francisco youth. The Direct Action Response Team, DART. In the summer of 1995, STORM created DART to give itself the capacity to respond to crises and sudden opportunities. STORM first activated DART to support UC Berkeley students, organizing against the elimination of affirmative action at their school. These projects provided STORM's first lessons about its external work. FIST represented STORM's first attempt at direct organizing in working class communities. Through FIST, STORM organized a community event in the housing project that was slated to be demolished. We held regular meetings with the Tenants Association, and we produced an agitational leaflet that we covertly distributed to public housing activists at a HUD-sponsored conference held in San Francisco. Still, FIST faltered as STORM members failed to follow through on their commitments. Eventually, FIST was out-organized by a city bureaucrat. STORM was struggling in its transition from direct action activism to systematic organizing. It became clear that we could not organize as a hobby. If we were serious about organizing in working-class communities of color, we would have to invest a considerable amount of resources to do it. For Real and DART were not organizing projects. Rather, they were attempts by STORM members to provide political leadership training and technical assistance to activists engaged in crisis-driven mobilizations and direct action. STORM members met with much more success here, developing lasting relationships with youth activists that have become integral parts of today's network of left and progressive organizations in the Bay Area. But both workgroups struggled to maintain clarity regarding their relationship to STORM. Members came up against tough questions about whether supporting other organizations could rightly be considered STORM work, and how it helped to advance STORM's vision. Underlying all of this early activity was the group's difficulty in deciding how and when to take up work. There was a lot of important and pressing work, and many opportunities to get involved. Without a systematic revolutionary strategy to guide us, we were often in a crisis response mode. We quickly found ourselves, and the organization's limited resources, stretched very thin. End of section 3.